So we're now at the third Sunday of Easter, and we're still at this wonderful initial period of Eastertide when the Church gives us, in our Gospel readings, the various resurrection appearances of the Lord Jesus to his disciples. That later in Eastertide we have the kind of the symbolism and meaning of Easter and the resurrection put to us. But right now we have the series of his appearances after he rose from the dead. And today we've got the account of how he appeared to the two men on the road to Emmaus. And it's a long gospel, but I want to draw two applications out of it for us. The first, I want to say that the Lord is walking at our side, even if he's unseen, just as he is walking alongside those two men on the road to the Emmaus, even though they didn't recognize him. And the second point I want to make is that the Lord has something to say to us, to say to you, just as he had something, a lot in fact, to say to those two men as they were walking to Emmaus. He spoke to them so powerfully that they said, as that text says, "Did not our hearts burn within us as he taught to us on the way?" So he walked by their side. So let's recall the context. They were downcast, it says in the text. They were focused on all that had gone horribly wrong, about how the great prophet that they'd followed had been handed over and sentenced to death. And a point that's very symbolic is that they were leaving all that behind. They were walking away from the action, so to speak, away from Jerusalem to somewhere else, Emmaus. And the Lord didn't abandon them in that state of being downcast. He walked by their side. And if we look at that account, it seems he was a long time with them, longer than any of the other resurrection appearances, walking by their side. He listened to their woes as they described them all. And then he taught them. He enlightened them. He showed them what they'd failed to see. That, as they said, they'd seen the things he said and did, his mighty wonders. But he then explained to him that those mighty wonders weren't just a great prophet, but in fact the long-awaited Messiah. That all of the scriptures had been about him. And his words to them transformed them. To repeat that phrase, their hearts burnt within them. His words so powerfully moved them and encouraged them. And that he then went in to stay with them. And in what would seem to be the first Mass after the resurrection, he gave themselves to them in the breaking of the bread, and to stay with them in a new way. So for ourselves, for us, he does something very similar. That in this COVID-19 lockdown, many of us are having enough. Many of us are downcast, to use that phrase, that word that applied to those two men leaving on the way to Emmaus. That many of us don't recognize that the Lord is at our side, but he is nonetheless at our side, just as he was at their side on the way to Emmaus. That as he promises, I am with you always, yes, until the end of time. He's by your side. Now let me suggest something else. That I think the Lord has something he wants to say to you, and to say to me. Something quite possibly different for each of us. that he always has something to say to us, something particular to say to us, something that I need to hear right now. His word needs to speak to me now. But he particularly wants to speak to us when we're in crisis, when we're in difficulty, when we're in a COVID-19 lockdown. And over the whole world right now, there's a kind of silence that if you've been reading the reports in the media, that the media have noted that people seem to be sleeping more now, that people seem to be having dreams more now, that Google search engines are showing more and more people that because they're sleeping more, because they're having weird dreams, they're looking, why am I dreaming more? And some of us are not just sleeping more and dreaming more, but we're praying more. That we're in this silence, this enforced silence. I read of a nun who was talking about this, saying it was like an enforced 90-day silent retreat. And even for a nun, a 90-day silent retreat is tough. But this is an opportunity as well. That the hectic pace of modern living has been very abruptly interrupted. And that somehow is an opportunity. So what might the Lord be wanting to say to you and to me? Well, now that he, through this, has somehow interrupted everything about modern living, well, this is a good moment to ask, has my life been focused on the right things in the past? That all the usual things my life is focused on have been stopped or at least interrupted. Well, should I be focused on them? Should that be what my life is all about? And when this lockdown's lifted in whatever phases and time scale, what will my life be focused on then? And then the Lord might also be asking us to think about how we relate to different people. That many of us now aren't able to relate to people normally. To see the family that I normally would want to see the friends I would normally want to see. Well, when this lockdown's over, how am I going to relate to those people differently? Am I going to value them differently, value them more? So this has all stopped me relating to things as I had before, stopped me relating to people as I had before. Well, this is therefore a chance to think, evaluate, decide for the future. How am I going to engage with people, with things? So to sum that up, the Lord hasn't forgotten you. As it says in Isaiah, though a mother forget the baby at her breast, I will never forget you. So let's remember that he is at our side, even when he's unrecognized by us. And let's try and listen harder to what he has to say, because he is speaking to us in this silence of the lockdown.